Nancy Popkins, she's one of our amazing autism resource specialists. She's been with the Autism Society of North Carolina for quite a few years, since 2003. So I'll let you all do the math. She's located in the Charlotte area, which does include the 10 surrounding counties. She is a very seasoned presenter and she is requested to do presentations across the state, so not just in her local area. She works very closely with service providers and families and other stakeholder groups. And she's had the privilege of supporting a lot of individuals on their journey throughout the autism spectrum. But her favorite part of her job is sharing her story and lessons she's learned along the way. So I think you all are going to be really, really excited to hear her lived experience, especially when it comes to our topic for today.
Thanks, Kim. Welcome, everybody. As Kim said, my name is Nancy Popkin, and I am an autism resource specialist. But more importantly, although that is really important, more importantly, I'm also a proud parent of two kids, one of whom is diagnosed with autism. And you're going to hear a ton about him today. You will meet him today on through photos. And stories that I will share. But he was diagnosed here in North Carolina back in 1996, a year after we moved here. And he is 32 years old today, or not today, but as we speak. So we are going to talk about motivating adults with ASD to do adult things. And I'm glad you are all here to talk or listen about this with me. So we're going to start off talking about what motivation is. And I actually consulted the American Psychological Association Dictionary of Psychology for a definition: a person's willingness to exert physical or mental effort in pursuit of a goal or outcome. So we're talking about motivation today. Many parents contact us as resource specialists telling us that their adult child has plenty of skills and they've come a long way, but all they do is sit at home, eat snacks, and play video games, and or they're doing things, but not as much as they think they should. And I just want them to get a job. I just want them to go out and socialize. I want them to do help out around the house, and they're just not motivated to do that. So it's a common call that we get, and led me to pull together this presentation. So we're going to think about motivation today for sure. So we're thinking about motivation. We're also going to think about adults. Many of our kids got diagnosed as children, but they do grow up, they become adults, and they're supposed to do adult things. So what do adults do? I gave this some thought and came up with a couple things. Adults do chores. I hope most of us do some chores around the house. They also work. Adults go to work. We need to work for a lot of reasons. We also socialize, maybe hang out with our friends, and we take care of our health. Those are all things that we do pretty much every day, in one way or another as adults. And we want our adult kids who are diagnosed with autism to do these things as well. And we do these things for a variety of reasons. I want you to think about yourself. What motivates you to do adult things? Adults are often motivated just because it's an expectation that we do these things. Society tells us this is what adults do. And so we grow up and we're like, okay, I've got to do these things. And that can be motivating in and of itself. Of course, working garners an income, and that can help us afford housing, food, clothing, help pay for our activities, maybe, if we can, save a little or make enough. We also do things that help us feel good physically or mentally. It might be exercise or maybe seeing a therapist or, I know for me, taking a walk or listening to a podcast, drinking a cup of coffee, may all make me feel good, either physically or mentally. And so I'm motivated to do those things. We're also motivated by social connections. We enjoy the people we interact with, whether they're neighbors or other people in our community, people at work, family. But there's also something called social currency. We know that if we have positive relationships with people that we interact with on a regular basis, that when we need help, those are people we can turn to. And so that also can be very motivating. And then finally, we do things because it's fun, right? We enjoy them. We may not enjoy everything we do that's an adult thing, but hopefully we're finding joy, throughout our day, maybe in little pieces and maybe doing some things that are especially joyful, but we're motivated by that feeling that we get when we have fun, right? So essentially, adults are motivated by having their needs met. We have a lot of needs. We meet them by doing things that fulfill these different parameters. So today, as we move through this presentation, we're going to think about a bunch of things. But I want you to think about, we're first identify barriers to motivation. Certainly getting a diagnosis of autism may present some challenges. And so we're going to talk about those. We're going to review some problem solving strategies, some accommodations and modifications that one could do that might help with motivation. But we're also going to talk a little bit about adjusting our own expectations and how to become a trusted partner with your adult child. So, covering a lot of bases while we're together. But the first thing I want to do is go back to our definition of motivation, where we started. A person's willingness to exert physical or mental effort in pursuit of a goal or outcome. I want to challenge you to think about this question. What if it is not about willingness? I hear a lot of people who are adults on the autism spectrum who are willing to do something, but maybe there's something preventing them from getting started or accomplishing the thing that you want them to do or that they want to do. So willingness is a big component of motivation, and it may not be a component for somebody with autism. So that's something I think we talk a lot about willpower and willfulness and willingness. And I think that if we consider that it's not about willingness for our kids, we might start looking at it differently. And certainly there are barriers to motivation for individuals on the autism spectrum. So typical motivations that we just described may not apply. So, for instance, an individual with autism may not be aware of societal norms. They may find those societal norms illogical. They don't make sense. And so they're not inherently motivating. Um, we also see that oftentimes into adulthood, parents are still caring for their adult child. They're providing food, shelter, and clothing, and probably even more. And so there's no reason to go out and take care of those things because somebody's already doing that for them. And then, of course, the future is very abstract. So when we make threats to our kids, if you don't do this, this is the negative thing that will happen. For someone with autism, that future may not be as apparent. When they were growing up, we know cause and effect was not as well understood. And often not motivating. I often do talks, and if you watch any of my other talks, I talk about having, individuals with autism almost have like an invisible hula hoop around their body, and everything inside that hula hoop matters, and everything outside doesn't matter quite as much. So that may affect, how they're attending to societal norms. Those norms are actually observing the behavior of other people, and they may not necessarily be in their hula hoop, that space that is important to them. So they're not paying attention to what other people are doing. And they may not necessarily be paying attention. If you think about that hula hoop representing time, they're thinking about the present right now, but not thinking about, well, what happens into the future. My future self is going to have to deal with, things I don't do now, for instance. And so that future becomes very abstract for them because it's time that isn't in the present inside that hula hoop. So again, this are characteristics of autism that may have an impact on motivation and seem like barriers. Some other barriers include a high level of distraction to high preference activities. So they may be more focused on the things they enjoy than the things they have to do. Um, they may also have sensory issues that maybe prevent them from doing certain, whether it's chores or getting out into the community to either socialize or work. So those things may be barriers. And then we look at some things related to executive functioning. So time management, problem solving, um, and knowing where to start to begin any activity. Those may be barriers that they experience due to executive dysfunction. They may be very overwhelmed by all that needs to be done. When we start rattling off, you need to do this, 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 that is very overwhelming. And we often will just shut down when that happens, if autism is at play. And then they may have, had experiences where they did try to get a job or try to do a chore or participate socially and having had negative experiences. And so we're seeing them, avoid those experiences again. And that can result in a lack of confidence. So all of these things add up to be barriers in the way of motivation for our folks. And then I think I've been thinking a lot about what happens as our kids move from like the paradigm of high school into adulthood. And I noticed just personally, but also, in doing this work, that structure decreases as kids grow into adulthood. So, when they're in school and school age, all those years, there's a set schedule. I get up, I go to school, and this is the expectation at school, and I follow my schedule at school, and I know what work I'm supposed to do, and it's all laid out for me, and here's my agenda, and I do this task and this task and this task, and this is how the whole thing works. And I come home, and then my parents are there, and they tell me when to do my homework, or they take me to an activity, or and then there's dinner and somebody else planned that, and then I go to bed and I do it all over again, right? So all that structure is there. And so I'm noticing though that over time it seems to decrease. So that structure, think of your kid sort of as water. And the structure of school is like a jar, and it keeps that water all contained. And we provide a lot of structure too, right? So we're part of that jar. And as they move from high school maybe to post-secondary education, um, or maybe they go into a program, it's like they're in a Ziploc bag and the sides are not quite as rigid. There may still be a little structure in place, but it's a little bit, less rigid and a little bit wishy-washy. And so things may not look quite as good as they did. And then once we leave, like if we leave post-secondary education, the structure kind of goes away, and now they're just a puddle. They're just spreading all over the place, not really getting anything done, just making a mess. Some people skip that Ziploc bag phase and just go from jar to puddle, but this is definitely something that I've witnessed actually in both of my children, where that structure goes away, and without it, they will become a puddle. So that's something to keep in mind. But there are things that we can do to sort of put that structure into adulthood. It doesn't mean that we have to be there verbally prompting them through everything. But we can use structure and other strategies to eliminate some of these barriers. So we think about some of the structure that helps support time management, for instance, right? So having a schedule, using alarms, setting alerts on our calendars can remind us of what we need to do. And I'm going to show you a couple pictures now of things that are in my son's world. And I'll share with you that he currently lives in his own apartment, just 2 miles away from us. And I only see him once a week. And, I think that all the structure, the visual supports that are in place in his living space are the things that give him the support without me being there. You'll see a link at the very end of this presentation to some of our other webinars, and I have a whole webinar just on visual schedules because it's probably the most important thing that parents of seemingly independent individuals with autism tend to fade away really early on and don't see the purpose of in adulthood. But for all of you that arrived here on time today at 4 o'clock for this webinar, you used alarms and calendar alerts and schedules to help you be here. At least most of you probably did. And so these aren't things that are like unique to autism, but they're kind of essential, right? But they can help eliminate these barriers. That's the first thing. We can also put visual supports in place to support like task completion. And that might mean like more detailed directions or checklists. And you can see that on the right, I have pictures of two different lists. They're not, one is just handwritten on a piece of paper and taped to the wall in the bathroom. The other one is a little bit nicer. I'm using the same laminating machine I got when he was 3 years old. And that's in his kitchen to help him know how to clean up his kitchen at the end of the day. Or he doesn't do it at the end of the day, every day, I know. But when he does do kitchen cleanup, he can use this to know all the things that he needs to do. And I put a little owl on it so that it would attract his interest because he likes owls. And that's sort of a thing to do is incorporate their interests into some of these visual supports if that's possible. And I know sometimes we think, oh, that's such a little kid thing to do. My kid is an adult, and so I wouldn't ever do something like that without asking permission from them. I know for him, I was like, do you want a picture of an owl on this or not? And he was like, yes, please. So that's, something we would keep in mind. We also can set up their sort of living environment to support organization. So putting things in strategic places so they can complete a task more easily. So for instance, like, sometimes I know in my house, I have my cleaning supplies in the laundry room. But if it's hard to clean the bathroom because of the added step to go to the laundry room and get the cleaning supplies, then we just need to find a place to stick cleaning supplies for the bathroom in the bathroom. So putting the tools we need in the place that we use them, for instance, would be a way to organize sort of environmentally to support a task or chore or something like that. And you're seeing a picture here of a yellow tray on a kitchen counter. You can see a dry erase board just a little to the right of it. And there's a couple things here to point out. But the first is that in his own apartment, when you walk in the door, you're actually at the kitchen. And we put this yellow tray to catch his eye. He actually had a preference for the color yellow. He always has. Um, and on that tray, we call it the check-in station. And it's where he keeps his meds. It's where he keeps his wallet, his phone, his ID for work. And so he knows when I come in, that's where I dump everything. And before I leave, that's where I grab everything. So creating that space that's easy to find, that was a really important step that we took in setting up his living space, to encourage, again, um, him staying on top of things to be able to do what he needs to do. And I realize I'm not talking about motivation per se with all of these things, but keep in mind that by making the tasks more clear so they don't have to think and remember, making space more clear, like decluttering space so it's clear where things go. It helps the brain function better. And for them, it may give them an easier point of entry and make it not so high a wall to climb over to do what it is we want them to do. Without any of these things, I'm pretty sure my son would watch cat videos all day. So, so that's an important thing to keep in mind. That these things may not seem inherently motivating, but they can help with motivation. We also want to think about incorporating their interests into all sorts of aspects of their life. So, I think it's good to take some time. What is your kid interested in? Is it video games? Is it anime? Is it drawing? Is it music? Is it movies? Is it trivia? Is it cars? It could be anything. But animals. So we think about what are they interested in, and then we sort of think about how can we put that, how can we integrate that into employment, for instance. So, my son loves succulents. You can see plants. And when he was looking for a job, um, he was looking at plant stores as one option. He's also really interested in museums as a whole, and he actually works selling tickets at a museum right now. Um, so that's very motivating for him to have a job in an environment that he actually enjoys. Um, we think about how those interests might help with social outlets. So, um, for people who are really interested in movies, maybe finding a movie club, or at least inviting somebody to go to the movie with you if that's something you enjoy. Um, we just, I'm not autistic, but I like birds. And, in our town, somebody started a bird watching club. And, I met new people by going to the bird watching club. And that's an interest of mine. So we do these things too, but they're almost essential for our kids. So, whether it's their interest in books and we work at a bookstore or at a library, or maybe we volunteer at a library. We get a job walking neighborhood dogs. It can help us get connected in some adult sorts of ways, but also those things can be very reinforcing. So, for instance, maybe they can't get a job that's around their special interest, but after they've worked, they've earned enough money to pay for movie tickets, to be able to, buy another plant for your collection, although watch out for that one. That sort of thing can be motivating as well, right? So that we are earning some money and we get to reward ourselves with the thing that we enjoy once we've done something that's difficult. And so that's kind of reinforcement. Um, and of course, if it's something we enjoy, we're going to find purpose in anything we're doing that it's associated with. So I am always looking for those interests to be integrated. But using those visual supports and strategies, are not the end all be all. One does not simply provide a schedule and then suddenly motivate an adult with ASD. We have to do a little bit more. And that little bit more may be that we need to change some expectations at home. We may need to up the ante, so to speak. So, for instance, maybe we need to charge some rent. If I've talked to many parents where the kid gets an adult child is getting an allowance, they live rent free, food is provided. Um, there's no incentive to earn money. But if we're charging a little bit of rent or requiring them to go to the grocery store and buy their own groceries, and cook their own food, then that may help them connect the dots. Oh, well, where's that money going to come from? Well, I'm going to need a job. And so, we may have to really set up a system where they can connect those dots and make sense between what their actions are and what the outcomes are that they're wanting, because that's not necessarily obvious for them. We can also require them to pitch in around the house and care for their living space, so their room. Um, maybe there's an expectation that it gets cleaned once a week or sheets get washed I don't know, let you fill in the blank. Um, and, that kind of thing. Um, if they're going to be living in your house, so that would be good. But we think about like external motivation. So sometimes we don't necessarily have that internal motivation that we were talking about at the beginning, where, I'm motivated because society says I should do this and because it's fun, right? Instead, we need to create some external motivation, and that's where that charging the rent, um, or having them buy their groceries, making an expectation that they pitch in around the house, that be part of what is motivating for them. So start thinking about, what are those little bits that you can do? You're not going to just throw it all at them at once, but incrementally adding some more responsibility can make a big difference. But we also may need to change our expectations for ourselves with them. So I think that, like, my personal expectation is that I make my bed every day. My personal expectation and preference is that the kitchen is entirely cleaned up at the end of the day. Um, my personal expectation is that I wake up, at a decent hour every day in the morning to get started. But with both of my kids, when they moved into adulthood, I really started learning that just because that's my preference for me, it doesn't mean that it has to be my preference for everybody, that everybody has to live to that same expectation. And so, I discovered, for instance, that my son could care less if his bed is all wrinkly and in a heap when he climbs in it at bedtime. He doesn't care. So I had to just sort of let go of that expectation that he's going to tidy up that bed every day. Um, and and the same is true with like the dishes, right? I've discovered that if he leaves his dishes in his sink for a day or two or three, and then he puts them in the dishwasher, guess what? His dishwasher cleans his dishes. And so I've had to sort of take a step back and think about how I can just sort of temper my expectations so that I'm not disappointed and not putting so much pressure on him to do everything that I expect myself to do. And I think that's really important. Now, there are always going to be things that are like, that is not negotiable. And that's okay. But I think you really have to step back and listen to your kid who's now an adult, sometimes telling you, like, that's not important to me. And and so I think you really have to weigh whether or not it's essential and critical or if it's something you can let go. Um, the first time I think I really thought about that had to do with time, and that's why there's an alarm clock on this slide. Um, because when my son came home from college and he was all done, he was often sleeping until like 11 or 12. And I was very frustrated by this. I'm like, you need to get up in the morning. People, adults get up, they get moving, they do things in the morning. And he's like, but I have nowhere to go until 1 o'clock. Like, why do I have to get up early? And you guys are up until 11, and I don't like watching TV because we only have one TV. He's like, I don't like to watch TV until you've gone to bed. So it's easier for me to stay up late, watch my programs, and then sleep until 11, and I get to where I'm going. So I had to really listen to him. It's like, all right, that all makes sense. I hear what you're saying. Let me take a step back and not worry about it. And really, the interesting thing is when he moved into his own apartment, he no longer waited until 11 p.m. to start watching TV. He'll do it after dinner. And he says like he magically wakes up at like 9:30 on days when he doesn't have to be somewhere. Um, and so he's waking up earlier, getting stuff done in the morning, just like, you know, we would expect. He's not waking up as early as I do, but he gets up. So I think changing our expectations I think makes a big difference because then we're not nagging them about everything. And I do think that this parenting stuff, as we parent adults, takes a lot of self-reflection too. And in that self-reflection, I want you to ask yourself a little bit about your own tolerance for risk. Um, And I didn't really think about this until I think my son was in college. And there was a choice that he needed to make about taking a class off campus at a community college. And he wanted to do it during the semester. I wanted him to come home and do it um, locally. And but I always like him to make the choice and not me make the choice. And honestly, there was a lot of risk involved with the choice of him taking it while he was at his college. Um and my sister, I was telling this to my sister, and she said to me, "What's the worst that can happen?" Now I know you guys are all thinking to yourselves, "Oh, there's a lot of worse that can happen." And if I leave things to their own devices. Um, and I thought about it, and there was some pretty big worsts, but I also thought about we've worked on this, and he's got this tool, and he's got his cell phone. I mean, there were things that I could, I would be willing to take that risk, and so I think that sometimes as parents, we either have a very low risk tolerance, and we would just want to kind of protect them. We maybe don't have confidence in them necessarily to let them go try something that might be difficult. And that can also be a barrier to motivation for them, right? Because we're the barrier as parents. Of course, there are parents who are not risk averse at all and are just like, yep, you do whatever. And I'll say I'm somewhere between medium and high, probably. I'm probably a little closer to medium, but I do allow for uh, taking chances. But I think about um, what's in place for him to support him should things go wrong, right? What's he going to do? And does he have that information? Again, that's where those visual supports come in, right? He has a list of people he can call in his phone and on a cabinet and directions in his kitchen, should something go wrong, for instance, while he lives somewhere else. So that's something I think to think about. Of course, that's more of I guess, a parenting tip that has to do with motivation. But I think that um, the tie into to how it impacts their motivation is if we are verbally communicating that we don't have confidence in their ability to make choices or do things, then they're going to be less likely to try. Because sometimes they're going to try and mess up, and we need to let them do that, and just be ready to, redirect them and get them back where they need to be. So that's something I think to think about for yourself. And this was something that I think actually my daughter taught me, but she said, please just take the word just out of your vocabulary. Um, we say it a lot. If you could just pick up your clothes, if you could just, just make that phone call, if you could just, as if the thing we're asking them to do is so simple. And maybe it is so simple for you, or me, or somebody who's neurotypical. But for somebody with autism or ADHD, autism and ADHD, autism, ADHD, and anxiety, um, that thing you're asking them to do may not be so simple. Um, and again, this came from advice from my daughter for me, because she has ADHD and anxiety. And, the idea that just doing this one thing might be so simple, just do it. For her, it was like a brick wall. And she shared this with me as well. And I think it's been really helpful to us, as a family. But the idea that for every task, every little task, every big task, you have to start somewhere. But what if you can't find the start button? And this is a lovely cartoon by a young lady who goes by ADHD Alien. And she says, my brain is like a stove without any buttons. And her boyfriend says, and knowing the consequences doesn't turn on the stove. And she's like, I know I have to cook, but how do I turn on the stove if it doesn't have buttons? So, think about yourself. You tell, if you don't look for a job, you're not going to earn money. And how are you ever going to pay your rent? And da 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 da. And all of that, worst case scenario spinning that we might do, it doesn't give them a start button to turn on the stove, to start the task. So she says, but when you walk in the room and check on what I'm doing, now, I can turn on the stove because you've spawned a start button for me. And that's what happens, right? You've told your kid 60 times, could you please put the laundry away? Put the laundry away, put the laundry away. And then you walk in and you say, have you put the laundry away? And they're like, no, I'm going to do it right now. And that's you honestly being that start button. So the big question is, how does, someone with autism or ADHD or anxiety, how do they get a start button for themselves? And that's where, she says in the cartoon, medication sometimes helps with a little bit of that, takes away some of the fog that might be hiding a start button. Um, but the question is really, what else can we do? And that is where some of those visual supports come into place. right? We put those things in place, and that might actually like clear away whatever is hiding the start button so they can get started on a task, breaking it down to maybe simpler components so it's not so overwhelming might reveal a start button. But I often, my kids, both of them, especially my son, we use this language a lot now. So if he's not doing something that I'm hoping he would do, and I've tried to do something that I thought would help, and it still doesn't, we have a conversation of like, let's think about what else we could do to find the start button. And that's actually a conversation that we have when we're doing problem solving together. Um, and I think that's a really important thing because for most of your kids, that start button, now that they're adults, you know, it's not there. And they're not starting all sorts of things, whether it's chores, whether it's hygiene related, whether it is finding a job, socializing, anything. Um, those are all hidden. So I think it's important to remember that your kid is now an adult. Our kids are adults, and we have to treat them like the adults they are. And that means we have to give them control and agency in their lives. Now, I know you're thinking, I do that, and they do nothing. And so that's why you're here. But we want to give them that control and agency, but we want to do it in a way where we're supporting them, not controlling them. Okay. So, what does that look like? We have to build a supportive, positive relationship with them. And I want you to think about this. This is something I'm going to share with you that is my son actually came up with, and I think it's brilliant. Or maybe he read about it, but he articulated it both to me and his therapist at the same time. And he said, when I was growing up, my relationship with my parents was vertical, which meant that my parents were on top, they had the power, and I was at the bottom, and I needed to follow directions and do what they told me to do. And they provided all the structure, everything. When kids grow up, just in general, their relationship with their parents shifts and it becomes more horizontal. And so you can be friends and just hang out and it's not, the power differential has changed. So I want you to think about your relationship with your parents when you were growing up. When did it shift from horizontal or it's vertical to horizontal? It probably did make a shift about the time that you transitioned into adulthood. And that's sort of the natural progression of things. But my son said, a lot of times I feel like the relationship is still vertical and I don't like it. And that was a very powerful message. And I heard it because I want to respect him as an adult, the adult that he is, in his own unique way. And so I'm always looking now for ways to, as much as possible, make sure that our relationship is horizontal or maybe a little diagonal. Although I will push it horizontal, even if he's asking me, just tell me what to do. And be like, oh, well, let's see if we can get it more horizontal where you're making that choice. And so that is where the parental role cards came from that I want to talk about. And you don't need to make these, but they give me an opportunity to talk to you about the different roles we may have as parents of adults. And so he and I came up with these different things. And And so we wrote down like the different roles that I might have for him. And we put them each on cards. And so these are actually in my house, until he lived with me, um, or left our house. And it might be that I am providing feedback. It might be that I'm a therapist or I am being a parent. Sometimes I'm being a teacher, sometimes a financial advisor or a consultant. And and so what we did initially was when he would talk to me, he would grab the card or cards that he wanted me to be. So he would say, I just need you to be a teacher right now and show me how to do this. Or I just want you to be a financial advisor right now. I don't want you to be a parent, or I don't want you to give me feedback. I just want you to be a financial advisor, right? So he would define what role he needed me for, and I needed to stay in my lane. And now we don't use the cards. He'll call me on the phone and he will say, I just need you to do this right now and nothing else. Sometimes he'll ask me to come to his apartment and he'll say, when you walk in, and he'll tell me, we're not doing an apartment check right now. I just need your help with my plants. And that's it. So I need you to be a horticulturist and that's it. Right. So I respect that. And because he experiences me respecting that, it has built this supportive, positive relationship between us. And honestly allows me to do a lot more than you would expect. But I'd never do anything, um, without his, permission and making sure that he's always in control. Um, Other thing that we did that I think was a big part of building that supportive, positive relationship, is something called the Compliments and Criticisms Board. Um, and I do it a little differently now that he's in his apartment, but in our house, I made this sheet and I put his favorite Pokemon on it. And he does like when I do those things. Not everybody will, but he does. And and we did this because our tendency as parents, especially if your kid is still living with you, you walk in the door and the first thing you notice is everything that's not as it's expected to be. Okay? If you walk into a room and one chair is upside down, your eye will be drawn to the one chair that's upside down and not the 12 others that are right side up. Okay? Human nature. You're just going to notice the thing that's not what you're expecting. So our tendency is to walk in the door and then as soon as we see, oh, you didn't do the dishes, you didn't take out the trash, or this is a mess. I don't know about you, but I say something. and and that was not good for our relationship. Because he'd be like, "Isn't there anything I did right?" And I want you to think about what their experience was growing up. Our kids, because they have executive dysfunction, because they have sensory issues, because they think literally and concretely, because of all these things, we're constantly correcting and redirecting and practicing, and it's a lot of work. And it's way more than a neurotypical kid experiences. And that's a dig on their confidence and on that relationship between their parents and themselves. And so, this was another thing that came out of therapy that we did together. But um, I put this on the um, the cabinet in the kitchen, and and that gave me an opportunity. It was like a visual prompt for me When I'd walk in the door, if I saw something that was out of place, I knew I wanted to write it on the criticisms board, but that would force me also to look for something that was right. And I would put it on the compliments board. And I got to tell you, as soon as I would start writing on it, he would come running in to see what I was writing. And, but it was also the first thing he would check every morning walking in the kitchen. And I would try really hard to look for things I could put compliments and no criticisms. And that was a big relationship builder. Um, and now when I go see him in his apartment, when I walk in the door, the first couple months, I was back in like criticism land. It was a mess. And he got really mad at me. And I had to go back and sort of rethink it. And that's where the dry erase board went on the counter. When I walk in the door, I actually have certificates. They're separate for compliments. And I will either verbally give him a compliment or I will write down something if it's really exceptional and I'm really proud of him and make sure I do that first. And then if I see things that aren't right that I want him to work on while we're there, I'll start writing them on the dry erase board. And the value of that is that I'm not verbally assaulting him with criticisms. He expresses often that when I'm verbally doing it, it feels like an assault, literally. And when I write it down, he can process it better and it's less aggressive on my part. And so, if you walk into my house, we have dry erase boards all over the place because that we have found is a much gentler and supportive way to parent. And we do it still in his apartment. So these are really important things that we need to do, if we're still parenting our kids when they're adults, to be able to make that relationship a little more horizontal. It's more supportive, it's more positive. So listening, and there's my son. He is in his own apartment. He loves his Magnadoodle. Um, and I will say when we're building that relationship, we have to listen to them and listen to their preferences, what they find difficult, what they think the barriers are to getting adult things done. We need to respect their perspective and try to put ourselves in their shoes. And as much as possible, honor their goals and wishes and needs, right? Because it's their life, not yours. And we want them to be as engaged and participatory in their life as possible. And us berating them is not going to get them there, but us supporting them is, right? So building that relationship, if anything, that's where we start. Because then they'll be more accepting when we add a schedule in or a checklist and we try to unearth some of those start buttons that allow them to do the tasks that need to be done. Now, doing this alone is not easy. You have already heard me reference seeing a therapist. My son and I worked with a therapist for about 2 years together on getting that relationship more balanced so that I could support him in his goals. Um, we also use supported employment services through what used to be vocational rehabilitation, employment and independence for people with disabilities. So that job at the museum, his job coach helped him find that. And, it wasn't me. Um, for those who have Medicaid, and if you're over 18, your child should be eligible for Medicaid, and they can access 1915I services. And that means that they could access community living and support services, somebody helping them with some of their chores, helping them with some of their um, uh, you know, community activities, volunteering somewhere, or, going to do something social. Um, and then, sometimes there is a place for pharmaceuticals. Sometimes those start buttons are hidden because of the way the brain is wired. And, I mentioned ADHD, I mentioned anxiety, and sometimes depression. There's a high rate of all of these mental illnesses in association with autism. And so making sure, that we're using those widely. Not widely, wisely. Um, I want to mention that even if a individual is on medication for anxiety or ADHD, um, it's not going to make it entirely go away, that they wouldn't need visual supports and structure and other support and services. But it will sort of part the clouds and make it so they're more receptive. Um, they're not going to be more receptive, though, if the relationship between you and them is combative and not positive and supportive, right? I think that's an important factor to keep in mind. But full disclosure, my son does take medications, and he has pretty much all of his life for anxiety. It's very high for him, and they have helped a great deal. Um, he's willing to try things and take chances himself because he's less anxious. So I think that's important. Other resources, people like myself, all of the autism resource specialists are parents of someone with autism. And while the autism spectrum is a broad range, so all of our kids are super different, we do work closely together, share lots together, and we are all happy to help either direct you to employment and independence for people with disabilities, EIPD, or to therapists. Or other specialists that might be helpful in this adult journey, and other programs and things. So please reach out to your local resource specialist by completing a talk with a specialist form. There's a place on those forms to put the county you're in, and then the form will get directed to the resource specialists that serve your county. We have all 100 counties covered. So, um, we do have a program in Davidson and Raleigh called Ignite, and it is for young adults who have graduated from high school up to about age 30. Um, these are individuals who have graduated with a future ready diploma, so a college bound diploma. And it is a peer-to-peer program, meaning that, they do take classes, there are staff, but there's a lot of peer-to-peer support where they're learning from each other, helping each other. They do skill training classes, they take workshops and do activities, but they also have social opportunities as well. So for some of you who are in sort of the Mecklenburg, Ardell, um, Cabarrus, Gaston area, and those of you in Wake, Orange, maybe Johnson County, Orange County. I said that one. Those programs may be accessible to you, and I would encourage you to look into those. I apologize, I didn't put the website, but I have a feeling Kim just put it up there for you. Um, my son did the Ignite program for I want to say for 3.5 years, and got a lot out of it. So that was really good. And then, if you're trying to figure out, some structural support maybe for your living space to set up some programming and some, external motivation and reinforcement to encourage, some of those adult skills, and you need some help with that. The Autism Society has short-term clinical consultative services through our clinical department. And they might be able to work with you. Again, these are, 4 to 8 sessions. It's usually paid for with health insurance. Um, and that can be very helpful as well. It's always done through telehealth. It's very important that you're able to do the follow through um, to be able to do what they're suggesting you do. And then finally, I think this is the last one. We have lots of more webinars. There's the visual schedules if you want to know more about why you should use them and how to use them, and all the things that they do. Because a schedule isn't just a schedule telling you what's next and what's next. It actually does a lot of things for individuals with autism.